Hello friends, Jennifer Pearson here. We're going to do a little, excuse me, I'm a little coffee today. I'm not sure what's jiggling the camera. Anyway, we're going to do a bit of a comparison between the Goddess Oracle and Ancient Feminine Wisdom in response to a question. So I have this little thing. I think I found it at Target. Well, you can't hardly read it here, but it says, and that's kind of poor decisions in production. But Q&A for the soul, and what it does is it gives you. It's a 5-year journal, so each year you re-answer the questions. There's also just a basic Q&A that is not for the soul. It's just Q&A a day that has more things like what is the oldest article of clothing you're wearing that day? Gosh, I just took a drink of water. I thought it would help. In any case, so I've started in this journal, and some of these are good for card pulls and some of them are not so much. But I thought this one, which is what happens when you give something your full attention, I thought that would be an interesting one to pull some cards around. And I thought it would be positive. But what did I get? So I decided to use the Ancient Feminine Wisdom because, that's my Oracle deck of the month. So I thought I would use that. And what did I get? I got Persephone. Not just what is that saying? It is not what I would expect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read for you what it says in the guidebook in the Ancient Feminine Wisdom for Persephone. Now, I will say this, being relatively familiar with that goddess, I didn't actually consult the guidebook. I just thought about it and I came up with what happens is I'm abducted to another world. If I'm fully concentrating on something, there is and some kind of abduction takes place. So the times when I give something my full attention, well, I think I do that quite a bit. I do that in my work, and there is some truth to the fact that, I'm not somebody who converts easily from work to, things that I need to do during the day. Even when I work at home, if I'm at work, I'm in the work mindset, especially if I'm doing a series of similar tasks or something that really requires close examination. I'm not going to remember. It's completely lost that maybe I need to, call and check on something on my health insurance that day, or unless I put something directly in my workspace to remind me that I have something personal that I need to address that day, it's lost. It's gone. I'm just focused on the work. So that had occurred to me. And the other less, because, this is the underworld, it's where the dead go, that what happens when I give something my full attention is that it dies. But I mean, that really isn't my experience. So, but the idea of an abduction taking place does make some sense. But I'm just going to go ahead and... But it's weird because, you know, I don't know, it's your choice to focus on something. I don't know. I mean, it does give some food for thought, but it was like, really, you're going to give me Persephone for this? So here's what it says in the guidebook. It says, Persephone was innocently playing when Hades seized her and dragged her into his underworld domain. To initiate her into the underworld, Hades gave her pomegranate seeds to swallow. As sovereign of what lies beneath the surface, Persephone governs the motives, compulsions, and impulsions that influence our life choices. The pomegranate symbolizes rebirth into the deeper wisdom lying beneath innocence. When Persephone is chosen, it suggests a descent into the self, a time to withdraw, reflect, and prepare for the next stage of life. An ending of the current phase is inevitable. To move forward more authentically, an encounter with an unknown or unlived part of the self must take place. It is not in the light, but in the land of shades that you will find the seeds of the next phase of your journey. Persephone is characteristic of the intense changes that occur when we come in contact with the unconscious. This descent stage in the archetypal journey confronts unknown aspects of the self. And while it certainly has some phrases in there that could be applicable, it's altogether over dramatic. Just like my use of the word abduction is over dramatic. So there's that. I pulled that, and again, it was like, yeah, okay, you know, I get it on a level. I get it. But it's not, I don't feel like I go into, when I give something my full attention, or like I'm absorbed in my collages or something, or a piece of writing that I'm doing, or let alone my work. You know, I don't feel like I'm doing anything that takes me into a shaded or unconscious sort of a situation. And I would say that, for example, you know, this card would, among my activities, this card would best suit like the act of journeying. But to me, the act of journeying is not having full attention. It's actually rather the opposite. It's kind of surrendering or allowing. It's more passive, particularly in the beginning, as you're doing the journey. So anyway, interesting, but it's like, I didn't know. So I thought, I was going to pull from the Goddess Oracle. And the reason that I thought of this, normally I would have just like pulled from a tarot. You know, I would have pulled an oracle around this question, and I would have pulled a tarot around this question. And I eventually did pull a tarot. But the reason I decided to pull from the Goddess Oracle is because last night I was thinking, you know, I've been reading the book that goes with Ancient Feminine Wisdom, and it's making me wonder, like, how many goddess decks do I need? Do I even use my goddess decks? I hardly ever use my goddess decks. I've got Ancient Feminine Wisdom. I've got The Goddess Oracle by Amy Marashinsky. And I have The Goddess Tarot, and I can't remember, Universal Goddess Tarot by, that's Los Garibello production. And I think if I were pressed, I would probably take the tarot version, the Universal by Los Garibello, because it has 78 goddesses, essentially, because it's a tarot deck. And because the companion that I would say, quote unquote, companion to it, is the Sol Invictus tarot that I have. And that it's a tarot, again, so you have 78 gods. So, but as most Los Garibello decks do, there's only the skimpiest of descriptions of all of the goddesses and their backgrounds in or for that Universal Goddess Tarot. It's your typical, this is the Ancient Feminine Wisdom little white book, and I think it's even thinner than this. So I decided to pull a card from this for comparison's sake. If I am going to put myself in a position where I'm making a decision, and in my deck of the month with the Ancient Feminine Wisdom, if in the end I'm going to make a broader choice and just leave myself with one goddess deck. And so I got this out, and I flipped through it for one thing. And I really do like it better than the Ancient Feminine Wisdom, because it's drawing from a variety of cultures, which I think gives it a greater variety of keywords and situations than the Ancient Feminine Wisdom, which is entirely the Greek goddesses. And of course, and this is problematic with goddess decks, actually, is that because now not all of the goddesses are coming from stages in culture that were male dominated. If we go back into the Egyptian and things of that nature, there were, the goddesses had a higher, stronger position, whereas by the time you get to the Greeks, there's a pretty bad attitude toward women in general, and it's reflected in the goddesses. Not entirely. We do have things like Athena, etc. And of course you can see positive aspects to the roles of goddesses like Demeter and things like that. So I just don't know. But I did find that I really liked this better as a deck, just flipping through it. And then it gave me, for this, Eurynomie, if that's how you say it, with a keyword of ecstasy. And I thought, I think Eurynomie is also in the Ancient Feminine Wisdom, and it is. And in the Ancient Feminine Wisdom deck, the keyword is creation, which I think actually makes more sense than ecstasy. So let's go ahead. So I originally pulled this from, and then I just pulled this out as a companion to compare. So I'm going to read about Eurynomie first from the Goddess Oracle, and then I'll read about Eurynomie in the Ancient Feminine Wisdom little white book. All right. So I'm not going to read the little poem that starts each of the goddesses in the in Marushinsky's deck, her book. So mythology, Eurynomy. And here they say Eurynomy, Eurynomy, something, Eurynomy, something. She tries to give pronunciation guides, and you can tell how well it's working with me. Or wide wandering is Pelasgian, and then in parentheses it says pre-Hellenic peoples of Greece, great goddess of all things. She divided the sky from the sea, and while dancing on the waves created the north wind. The north wind grew lustful, so she seized him in her hands and formed a serpent she called Ophion. Eurynomy made love with Ophion and then assumed the form of a dove to lay the universal egg out of which all creation came. So she is very creative. She seems to be problem solving the whole way. But again, the key word on this card is actually ecstasy. Ophion, not content with being a creation of Eurynomy, I'm just going to pronounce it that way because it's easy for me, and then co-creating with her, boasted that he was the supreme creator. Eurynomy knocked out his teeth and banished him. Meaning of the card. Eurynomy dances into your life to tell you it is time for ecstasy. Ecstasy is here for you in all its fullness, exuberance, and rapture. How can you give yourself ecstasy, that deeply nourishing, intensely joyful place? One way is by healing the wounded parts of yourself. Your wounded parts take up emotional space within you. Once healed, the space they previously occupied becomes available for ecstasy. The more space within, the more room for ecstasy. Another road to ecstasy is to open to it, to give yourself permission to call it in, feel it, and revel in it. For those of us who have experienced little joy in our lives, the conscious decision to court, seduce, and entice ecstasy ensures it will come. Eurynomy says that when you make the decision to dance with ecstasy, all life challenges you with the opportunities to facilitate that dance. Now, initially, it's like, yes, this makes more sense when you give something your full attention that you would experience. So ecstasy is, again, a bit of a dramatic or strong word, or at least the way she's talking about it. But they talk about flow state. You get into a flow state is how we talk about that, losing time and losing a sense of time and that sort of thing when you're really absorbed in something. But even the initial description of the myth comes closer to this keyword of creation than it does to this ecstasy. Frankly, I don't see where she gets ecstasy from the mythology. She had a bit of a Frankenstein moment there with her serpent that she created. She creates the serpent and then it turns on her kind of, and she has to give it some comeuppance. And yeah. And as I described my, the things that I tend to get absorbed in, ecstasy is not what I experience. It's kind of when I'm totally absorbed in my work, no, it's not that kind of work. There isn't ecstasy there. I don't even know that I quite get into what would be called a flow state there either. That would be more, either doing something with writing or collaging, arts type stuff, or, there are some times, I would say moments, that I go in and out of that state if I'm doing card reading. But I wouldn't describe any of those states or those experiences when I'm in that state as ecstasy, to be honest. So yeah, and then Marushinsky also provides a ritual suggestion, which I'm not going to go into, which is another thing. It's like I am not a ritual person. I'm not, I am looking at these as archetypes. I'm not looking to bring them into my life on a deeper level, which is what I assume people who and I won't even say worship goddesses, but who associate strongly or hold a particular goddess close to them, that they're taking it to another another level than merely seeing it as an archetype. And so that may be one of the reasons that I don't refer to these decks very often. So let's take a look at Eurynomie in the Ancient Feminine Wisdom deck. Now, I'm going to add that I had mentioned that in an earlier, when I started this, and probably in my initial review of the Ancient Feminine Wisdom deck, that it is divided into not suits but categories of goddesses. And these two goddesses, Eurynomie and Persephone, are in the same category, which is chthonic. I don't know how you is CHTHONIC, and it says chthonic goddesses dwelled in the earth and ruled the underworld. So I'm not sure why they had this there, because to me Eurynomie would have been better suited in some of what they call the first goddesses. But in any case, she's with this. This is how it's being perceived here. These potent goddesses of magic and mystery knew the feminine secrets of the eternal round. I'm not even sure what's meant by that, unless they're talking like the spiral or something. When these initiatory goddesses appear, a transforming experience is inevitable. And I don't, again, when I give something my full attention, now, I will say this, when I give something my full attention over a period of time, certainly it transforms, on the assumption that that is my intent, is to transform, then it transforms. Or when I give something my full attention or intention, I hopefully will get better at it. So I could see that addressing the question. But here it says, Eurynomie, creation. To the ancient Aegean people, so there seems to be some historical or nomenclature differences. I think in this deck it was Pelagian, and this is Aegean. Anyway, Eurynomie arose out of chaos and separated the land from the sky. Eurynomie began her work bringing the world into being. Laying the egg from which all creation came forth, the primordial Eurynome heralds the birth of a new order or the reimagining of an idea or project. And that makes some sense to me in terms of the question. Her presence confirms there is something in the wind. So it's really taking some different things. Like this includes the aspect of the dove and the north wind becoming the snake. And here it's generalizing more by saying there's something in the wind. The hermit coiled around the goddess is an omen that the instinctual force of creativity is about to arise and reshape the world as you know it. There's quite a bit of talk in this book, this little white book with the ancient feminine wisdom, about women being instinctual. And I object to that. It's not solely what it says for each person, but there's kind of a leaning that way. And again, it could be, that he's tuning in because it's a man that actually... Kay Stevens is the artist. I don't know to what extent she was also involved in the writing. But Brian Clark is also noted here. So on the cover it says by Kay Stephen Tunn and Brian Clark. So it could be that he did the writing, as is the way of these things. I think this is U.S. Games. Yeah, this is a U.S. Games. It doesn't say who Brian Clark is anywhere that I'm seeing, so that we might know what authority he might have or why he's the one writing this. Okay. So I've lost track of what I was even saying, except for the instinctual part. So I guess I don't know if he was trying to stick to the Greek notion of femininity based on what he knew about Greek ideology at that time, or if it's his own way of looking at the divine feminine, that it is closer to instinctual. So the last sentence in this description aspect says, on an oracular level, Eurynome signals the outpouring of creative possibilities. It's kind of interesting because when I am fully focused on something, I'm no longer in brainstorming mode. I'm more in making whatever that one thing is work. So I'm open to something that might spontaneously suggest itself that seems better than what I'm doing, but pretty much at that point I've closed down other possibilities. And then there's a little paragraph that's feminine wisdom. Out of chaos emerges the power to create. Eurynome personifies the possibility that something can arise from nothing, and that creative potentials arise out of confusion and disarray. In the end, I confess I come to no conclusion, particularly. As I said, when I just flipped through the decks, I tended to like this one better. I liked that this gave more specifics of the myth than in the little white book for the ancient feminine wisdom, was kind of doing more interpretation without giving the details of the myth. But then this kind of disregarded the myth that it provided and then went off on its own tangent. It is in my perception of those two sections that I read from this book. And I don't know. I don't know which one of these I would in the end choose as representing what happens when you give something your full attention, in terms of my experience with that. So I said, all right, I'm going to get grounded here. I'm sorry, I don't know why this is wiggling so much today. Maybe I'm leaning too much on the table. My camera's wiggling. So I decided to pull a tarot card. And what tarot card do I pull? But the Five of Pentacles. And that actually does make some sense to me, because I ignore my body when I'm fully focused on something mentally. I lose track of my body. And it's actually quite a big problem. Like, again, I work at home. So if I had the goal of like drinking more, it would be an easy thing to do, right? But no, I forget. I can even have the water sitting nearby, and I completely forget because I'm so focused on whatever it is I'm doing. So, so yeah, that can be an issue. And I think that it's actually an issue too. I mean, I almost imagine that if you had a heat center and or a heat sensor, and you know, it was attached to my body while I'm, you know, doing my regular work, or am collaging or doing something that I'm mentally focused on, that you would see that the rest of my body was going dormant. I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if like the blood flow was primarily, you know, in the brain. And it's like, for extended periods of time, I think that that's really not very healthy. I think it probably affects one's metabolism, etc. So this did give. I was wanting something more grounded, and it did give a very practical, as far as I can tell, direct answer. And I do get this, abducted, just the idea of, you know, that my attention gets abducted. I don't think it's the best representation. Again, it's a little dramatic, and it's like I don't feel like I go from Persephone picking flowers and then give something my full attention and end up being dragged into Hades. That's not the experience, or I would never do it. Or into some kind of subconscious state of mind, or I don't know. I mean, if you think of, you know, ignoring your body is a kind of death, then maybe that's what that is. But I would have needed this card to think about this in that way. You know, if you think of Persephone as being divorced from life, then, you know, I do end up divorced from my physical being, my physical vitality. I do end up being divorced from kind of what's going on around me in my life. So anyway, again, you know, and maybe this was it, but this was just an exploration. I think the creation makes quite a bit of sense, but not what comes up in the guidebook particularly. So, all a matter of kind of questioning the utility of goddess decks. And I think I leaned toward them because of a curiosity about mythology, wondering what goddesses would be represented. And of course, when you've got decks that represent goddesses from a variety of cultures, that's really interesting. So I begin to think that maybe there's another class of decks. There's decks that are very utilitarian. You can use them for everyday purposes, your basic tarot, and there are some oracles, I think, that work really well for that. There are art decks, which I had suggested. This might just end up being an art deck because I like the art so much. And possibly same here, but I don't want to have a lot of art decks. I have to be honest. And so the other class of deck would be learning decks or discovery decks, like discovering goddesses. And, doing it in a visual way with just a little bit of information and not an overwhelming amount of information. But I have to be, in the name of honesty. Let me get something here. In the name of being honest with myself. If I want to know about goddesses, I've got this book. I have this book. And I don't know if I can even show you how thick it is. I mean, this is my finger, and so it's almost this thick. Of course, you can't tell that either. So, let me give you a page number. Can I show it to you like this? Yeah, that kind of gives you a sense. The very, very, very last page is 1124. And let's see. Well, here we go. I just popped it open kind of in the middle. And we have, and it's a big book too. We have, at the top, we have Manu. This says Manu. Mara. Which goes all the way here. We have Mardal. Which is related to Freya. And then we have Marduk, which I think is not... This is a god, Marduk, okay. Not a goddess. So, so if I really am feeling interested in a goddess, here it has something that it's called left hand, which I suppose is left hand path. As the Knights Templar, knighthood, the ceremony of. It has Jesus and Mary Magdalene, I just saw there. Saint Irene. It's just got a lot of stuff. Hina. So if I was really wanting to dive in to information about goddesses or whatever, I could consult this book. And frankly, I don't consult this book very often. Let alone, of course, the internet at this point. So, yeah, there's Kali. And this book doesn't have everybody. I know that one of the goddesses in the... I would say that this book is not as multicultural as the Goddess Oracle. And when was it? This book was actually given to me, and the copyright is 1983. So yeah, in the goddess, no, the Universal Goddess deck, there's one of the goddesses. I couldn't find much online about it either, and it wasn't in this book. But so there remains a big question mark in my mind. Do I keep these two decks? If I don't keep them, one of the things I was thinking of doing, as opposed to giving the deck to someone, would have been to give these cards to friends, you know, in a letter or whatever. But I have to say, whoops, that I would have to with a lot of them, like Alcestis here, I would have to make a copy in the guidebook so that they would have any idea what the reference really was about. Or for that matter, Eurynomy that we just talked about. And I don't know if I could divorce, I don't know if I could divorce these cards from their goddess meanings. So that might be the next thing that I'll try. I think which would be difficult would be to just use the images intuitively. See, I could see using this image intuitively. You've got a woman that appears to be in a swoon here, and then you have a dark figure, shaded figure, like a ghost sort of a thing, which could be seen as either malevolent or benevolent, depending. It's probably, she's got a cup here, it could be her spirit leaving her body. You could see it in a lot of different ways. And although this is very Hades and Persephone, you've got these demonish kinds of things going on around. If you didn't have that association with Persephone, you could see this as a man helping a young woman through, these demons and shades and creepy things that are going on. Or for that matter, you could see the woman helping the man, because she is actually in the foreground there. I'm not sure what I'd do with that. Again, taking both the keywords and the name of the goddess off of it. What could I do with that? I don't know. It looks more like a struggle to me than the Eurynomy with the snake here. It looks more like a struggle is going on. To me, this would be, if I don't know, eggs, snakes come from eggs also. So or at least I think that's, I've lost my biology. Now I'm questioning that. But this egg is supposed to come from this, well, in this, it was a dove. This looks more like a goose. So yeah, this would be problematic. But I think my next step, beyond finishing the book, would be to look at the cards in that way, as images without the specific goddess or keyword association, whether they could be read intuitively. And then, what I want to do. What if I just want to pass it on to somebody, or keep it? And again, it has made me question the goddess oracle as well. To what extent I need goddess or god decks at all. So it has brought up some big questions that I don't want to think about anymore today. All right, everybody. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I will see you again soon. Bye-bye.